Hey guys, it's Sunday. Now, I know yesterday I gave you guys some extra chapters because I was kind of looking for something to do, and also because I really wanted to get to chapter 20 today because I know Joe's out there watching and he has a theory regarding the villain of this book, and I have a feeling chapter 20 might change his opinion. But I don't want to give too many spoilers, so we'll just get right to it. This one's going to be a little longer of a chapter, which is a good thing. So let's just jump right into it. Chapter 20. The Mother's Cure. Blood joins all creatures, great and small. The forgotten gods, whose names cannot be uttered by human tongues, were known as the Mother and Father. They splashed their blood upon the earth, and life sprang forth. The air, the land, and the places that the sun had not yet found define the forms of each creation. The dawn of magic shaped earth for all the creatures that followed. The forgotten gods smiled upon their children, giving them dominion. The father turned his eye towards the great beyond, but the mother kept a distant watch over her children. Through their magic, the first lords of the earth shaped the world. Fertile lands, crystal clear waters, shimmering rainbows that danced between clouds. Beauty was the gift of those of ethereal magic, and all they laid eyes on was to be made glorious to look upon. Not to be outshone by the creations of their brothers, elemental magic shaped the lands, raising mountains of fire and ice, infusing the ground with minerals that hardened into stones of beautiful color. Magic of the shades turned the earth magic of the shades turned the earth so that where there was light, darkness could exist, and revealed the twinkling starlit sky as the sun gave way to the moon. Magic and blood created life, and so too did the first lords of the earth. Like the mother and father before, they shared their blood, passing down their gifts to the next generation. They filled the newly created lands, each claiming their right of dominion. Wars soon stretched across the earth. Waters that once ran clear turned murky and undrinkable, polluted by the dead. Magic shattered the land as battles raged on with no end in sight. All the beauty of creation turned to ruin. Blood and magic destroyed life just as easily as it had once created it. The Great Mother could not stand idly by and allow her children to squabble and ruin the world that she had given them. From each branch of magic, she made a sacrifice, binding their blood to a lone fruit tree growing among the ruins of a great battleground. With her careful tending, the tree grew strong and tall. Drinking in the blood-drenched soil, its bark hardened to a deep crimson. Its deep green leaves turned brown, but fortified by the mother's care, the tree bore fruit, the likes of which had never been seen. Sweet nectar, clear and pure as running water, plumped the pulpy fruit. Skin so pale yellow it almost looked translucent, allowed a glimpse of the nourishment just below its tender flesh. The fruit tempted any who happened across this great tree. Water washed the blood clean, and so too did a bite of the fruit. Rendering powerless those who had eaten it, each hungry warrior was marked by the tree so the mother could see who had been changed. Only once did the tree bear fruit, but from that single harvest thousands of enemies were neutralized. The mother plucked the last of the fruit from her great tree, saving it should she need its magic once again. The tree withered and returned to the ground, and the mother gathered her newly changed, fashioning them into her own army to fight the destructive forces of magic. Sage yawned and set the book aside, wondering how much of what she had read was the imagination of whoever had written it. Mythology and fantasy often ran in similar veins. She half expected to see mentions of dragons fighting in these magical wars. Powerful magical creatures ending the wars instead of fruit. Though she couldn't ignore the parallels of modern religion mythology either. Special fruit? Was that the thing they were looking for? Was that what was hidden in the archives? Magical fruit? Doubtful, not unless it was petrified. Her stomach growled. It had been hours since her last meal, and if she waited much longer, she'd soon look like a withered old piece of fruit herself if she didn't get something to eat. Sage was 2 steps from the front door when Matt called out, "Where do you think you're going?" She'd excuse his tone this time. He had a right to be annoyed with her. And what better way to make amends than with a night out? Want to join me for a greasy burger down at the pub? No, not really. He waved her off, returning his attention to the TV. I deal with enough barflies at work. What Sage wanted most was to be around someone who she trusted, but she wouldn't push it. She'd find other ways to get back into Matt's good graces. At least at the bar, she could be around people and not feel so alone. Julie always looked out for her, and no doubt her favorite waitress would be interested to hear about how her night out with Zach had gone. "When will you be back?" Matt asked, with a hopeful edge to his tone. He didn't make eye contact, though. Sage noted this. He was playing her, pretending not to care, but she had no doubt that he was desperate to make sure that she would, in fact, return. "I'm not going to leave you hanging again like that. If I decide to run off into the sunset, I'll at least leave you a Dear John letter." "Don't even joke like that." His voice soured. "It's just a burger, maybe a beer or two." Sage shouldered her purse and opened the door. "Hey," Matt called back. When she turned, he was standing, holding something out in his hand. "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." Always looking out for her, she smiled and accepted the pepper spray he'd offered her. "I'll be back soon." "You better." "Allons-y." She winked and made her retreat. The night felt a little less friendly as she stepped outside the confines of her home. Knowing what she knew about the world hidden within the one she thought was real had her jumping at shadows. A sense of unease quickened her steps as she took the short path to the outer gate of her apartment complex. She had always known that there were bad people lurking in the shadows, but now the shadows themselves could be evil. The persistent nag of hunger, though, drove her forward. The pub was no more than a 5-minute walk, 2 if she ran. Setting her pace with the promise of a hot meal, she reached into her purse and gripped the small bottle of pepper spray. She'd rather it be one of her mother's daggers, but short of any real weapon, this would have to do. If nothing else, she'd make anyone who dared come at her scream in pain. Flickering streetlights, the sound of car doors slamming in the distance, everything that she'd ignored in the past now made her nearly jump out of her skin. "Don't you have a car?" a familiar voice called out behind her. To her credit, she didn't jump. Sage turned to see the vampire Zach, the one from the other night, staring at her with a glint in his eye. Was that hunger or humor? "Have you learned nothing?" He flashed his trademark cocky smile, revealing teeth that Sage knew were just as deadly as they were white. "Don't bother answering. You wouldn't be out here if you had." Just as deceptively handsome as the last time, Zach's dark brows hung over eyes so blue that they looked like ice. Only this time, she knew better than to fall for his pretty face. She stood in stunned silence for a moment, trying to determine whether to run or attack. He had lured her out into the open last time they'd met, presumably to kill her or worse. So what were his intentions now? "Did they steal your voice?" he mocked her. "Or have my mesmerizing eyes rendered you dumbstruck?" Smooth as ever. His words had lured her in last time, but she knew better. He was a vampire. What had she read about them? No, what had she been told about them? By Devon. They were stolen magic, ones who could turn a Terra into a Darkling. Pepper spray wasn't going to do much, but damn it, if he tried anything, she'd unload the whole damn bottle on him. "You're wondering whether or not I'm going to hurt you." His expression darkened. The glint in his eyes sharpened with all the intensity of a viper ready to strike. Definitely hunger. Her blood ran cold in her veins. Sage inhaled a sharp breath. "You seem like a decent person. I'd hate to kill you." He delivered the line with a disarming wink. The dread evaporated the moment she recognized those words and where they'd come from. "And you seem less like a decent person," she smirked. "But I'd hate to die." Despite his attempt to quell her nerves with nerdy catchphrases, the warning in his laughter was real. "You were warned, I'm sure, to stay away from vampires." Gray had said something similar after he'd saved her from Zach. "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" Sage asked. Her memory's still a bit dull on exactly what had happened the last time they met. As badass as Gray pretended to be, Why did he leave this vampire alive to continue whatever it was that vampires did? I am, in a way, Zack responded without missing a beat, turning his head to reveal a scar on his neck. But don't worry, all the equipment's still in working order. Another naughty wink confirmed his innuendo. A shudder threatened to reveal her disgust, but she held herself still. He might just as easily take that as fear. She couldn't show that, no matter how much her heart was racing, given that he was within striking distance. She hadn't learned what vampires were truly capable of. Were they fast? Were they superhumanly strong? Sage assumed the worst and kept her tone sharp. Guess Gray didn't kill you then, did he? Kill me? Zack shook his head slowly, clicking his tongue with disappointment. That's no way to treat a compatriot. As if he could. He puffed his chest with pride as he closed the gap between them, close enough for Sage to feel the wind from his breath. Your pal Gray asked me to scare you. He needed you to see reason, which clearly you haven't. Should I try harder this time? That bastard, Sage growled, anger overtaking the fear. She'd been manipulated by both of them. We all must bend to the whims of you Terras eventually. Zack bowed low, mocking her further. She wanted to slap that annoying grin from his face, but didn't dare to invite him to put a hand on her in return. From time to time, when it's worth my efforts, yes, I willingly aid the cause. You say that like it's a bad thing. She threw the words back at him, but felt their meaning all too well. They had used her just as easily as they had the vampire. Circle of life, he waved a dismissive hand. But my involvement ended when they brought you in. She wasn't buying that. He wouldn't be lurking in the shadows near her home if that were the truth. Gray's little spy. At least Gray was smart enough not to come himself. He was the last person she wanted to see. Just the thought of him conjured up the memory of what he'd done. Zack made a better emissary, but not by much. So why are you slumming it around here still? It's dinner time. Hunger returned to his eyes. He licked his lips for effect, but she wouldn't dare let him see the shudder. She wasn't giving him that satisfaction. Oh, don't flatter yourself, newbie. You're not on the menu. Terra is an acquired taste. Ally or not, Zack gave her the creeps. If you dislike my kind so much, then why are you working for them? Oh, quick to call ourselves Terra now, are we? His taunt made her pause and look at her wrist. He continued before she could open her mouth to speak. Having that mark means you're special, but are you truly ready to say you're one of them? Sage thought about it for a moment. She'd been led to believe that it was her life's mission. Bearing the mark meant it was her duty to join the ranks of A.S.S.E.T. Zack again responded before she could come up with a worthy retort. Your kind? People the world, you know. But not all of them operate behind the shield of A.S.S.E.T. And you're telling me this why? Because when I first met you, I was serious about guiding you to a place where you could find out more of your special marking. Because you're being compensated by Gray, right? She all but rolled her eyes, expecting him to give her the company line. If he couldn't scare her, he could always try the righteous route. Make her see the greater good and all that bullshit. More manipulation, and she refused to fall for it. He's not the only one I know who can help you. Zack left his words hanging in the air for her. She snatched at the opportunity to reply before he could go on. No, he was just the first to pay, right? Zack smiled wickedly, as if she were saying all the right things. Everyone has a price. So you're a double dipper then? Consider it being entrepreneurial for a good cause. You clearly have no idea about who or what you are, and I happen to know people who can educate you. Everybody wins. Except me. All these people you claim to know are just going to use me for their own ends. You can only be used if you allow yourself. Knowledge is power. Well, he did have a point there. She was walking blindly through a world that she hadn't yet learned the rules to. Other than the books she'd taken with her, there was little else to teach her how the way of things worked. True enough, but what I've learned from you is not to trust anything you say, she scoffed. You've already outed yourself as a player for both sides. Good and evil aren't sides to be played. Thinking that is your first mistake. He tapped her on the head lightly with the tip of his finger. No one wakes up in the morning eager to check off their evil to-do list, though plenty of righteous people will never let you forget their victories. All people are self-serving. Good and evil are just labels. Well, I have no money to assure your services, so thanks but no. I'll figure it out on my own. Sage replied defiantly and stepped backwards to put a few feet between her and the vampire. Suit yourself. But a word of caution before you go. Your people's strength relies on teamwork. Alone, you're nothing but tasty prey for those with a discerning palate. She fought to hold off the shiver working its way up her spine. I should be glad you're no connoisseur then, right? If I were, you'd be in my thrall, keeping that loud mouth of yours shut. Fear was the greatest enemy of all, and despite the brave face she tried to show Zach, when she opened her mouth to throw an insult back at him, all that escaped was a squeak, as she remembered the creature her mother had become. Zach's brow pulled together as he closed his eyes. A moment of silence passed them, only breaking with the sound of his frustrated sigh. Maybe he regretted his remark? I've been in your place. Zach surprised her with gentleness in his tone. New to a life that I couldn't possibly understand and uncertain of what lay ahead of me. You stole your immortality, she threw at him, unable to control the tremble in her voice. Sage balled her fist in anger, part of her wanting to take a swing at the asshole for threatening her, the other part realizing just how much she should fear him for what he could do to her. Thankfully, he hadn't, but how much of that was because he'd been paid not to? Annoyance flashed across his face, but to his credit, Zach held to his soft tone. I stole nothing. I was gifted it by my lady love. The same lady love I saw you dismissing the other night? No. Dead more than 50 years, but I can still remember her sweet smile. Zach gripped his chest, wincing as if the memory caused him pain. Ours was a love that spanned more than a generation before she was taken from me. Anger and distrust morphed awkwardly into a sad sympathy, but Sage held firm where she stood. I'm not sorry. I was the poor farm boy to her buttercup, he paused, allowing Sage to make the connection. The last time they'd met, she had laughed, baiting him with fantasy references. Now it was his turn, and the effect disarmed her better than anything else that he'd said. When she was turned and taken from me, I searched night and day to find her. She was my true love. He took a breath and let go of his chest. The bad boy facade melted away, revealing pain and loss that gave truth to his words. When I finally found her, she had been changed, but I loved her no less. I had promised my heart to her, and she took it willingly. In return, she gave me the gift of immortality, and we shared our hearts in the truest of sense. So don't speak to me as if I'm some thief in the night stealing magic that I don't own. Embarrassment replaced her haughty sense of self-importance. She'd been a Terra for only a few days, but had already developed prejudices from her ignorance. Zach might not have been the most trustworthy of people, but he had been more honest than Gray. I wasn't always a vampire, Zach reminded her sternly. The learning curve was steep when I was turned, and I can appreciate where you're at now. Being unaware for so long of what your destiny had in store for you, mock me if you want, but no matter what I gain from helping you, ultimately it's you who benefits most. And how did your lady love die? She asked, gauging his response for truth. She developed a discerning palate. He smirked, reminding Sage to keep on her guard. So will you come now and let me lead you towards a new mentor? I'm sure you can understand if I don't trust you to be my guide. Honest as he had been, a nagging sense of worry still lingered, making it more real every time she saw those sharp fangs poking out below his lips as he smiled. Trust the streetlights above or the people walking along the roads with us. I'm not leading you into the dark. Where we're going, you'll find more light than even I can stand to be around. Zach waved a hand as if to say, follow me. And on a restrained sigh, she followed, praying she wasn't walking into another trap. Keeping to the glow of the street lamps. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the Bulwark Gym. Devin's place. Here? This is my trainer's place. You trust him then? Zach insisted. as if he already knew the answer. Of all the people she'd met, Devon had been the most open with her, but being connected with Zach, that didn't sit well with Sage. I guess. If you can trust him, then you can trust that I'm not leading you into another trap. That remains to be seen, she replied, wondering who else was on this double-dealing business. Zach, Gray, and now Devon. Of the three, though, Devon was the least likely to blow smoke up her ass, and he'd already given her more information than the others. So she supposed he was the lesser of three evils? The doors were closed, but the inner lights were still on. Have fun storming the castle, Zach attempted to bow out before Sage knocked, but as her hand touched the glass, Devon appeared as if blinking into existence. Looking both shocked and relieved, he pulled them both inside his gym. I thought the worst when Gray said you disappeared. He had to mention that bastard. I didn't feel safe there, she replied sourly, wondering how closely linked the three guys were. Devon and Zach eyed each other as if having a silent conversation that she couldn't hear. Don't you work for A.S.S.E.T? Sage broke the silence with her accusation. With them, not for them, Devon replied. I come in to help with the training and assessment of new recruits. Because you believe what they do is good, right? She repeated the same words he'd said earlier to her, hoping that the meaning might elicit some real truth this time. Generally, yes, Devon responded with more reservation than he'd had earlier. Doubt had settled in. Even now, she could see the seeds of it spreading across his face. There was more to be said, but just like with all the others, Sage knew knowledge would not be easily gained. Well, obviously not everyone holds your same viewpoint of that organization, Sage began, hoping to lead him to a better explanation. Yesterday's attack was unprecedented. I'll give you that, Devon agreed. An air of suspicion, though, soured his words, but his answer gave no further insight. Zach scoffed. A.S.S.E.T is responsible for the recent attacks on my clans. A.S.S.E.T only goes after problems, Devon said defensively. Depends on your definition of a problem. Zach all but rolled his eyes, clearly no love lost there for the organization, and yet Sage wondered why he too seemed to ally himself with those who worked closest to it. None of it made sense, but the way they talked further solidified her position. Leaving A.S.S.E.T had been the right thing to do. Whatever was going on, she wasn't safe there. But was she safe anywhere? Enlighten us, then, Devon speared Zach with a look that chilled Sage's blood. As predatory as the vampire was, she'd put her money on the ogre to come out on top if they came to blows. There are whispers among my kind. Zach took a step backwards, edging towards the door. Word on the street is, agents have been clearing house without provocation. They have a new kind of weapon. A week or so ago, a whole coven were just reduced to dust. I've heard no such thing, Devon retorted. Why would you? You're not an agent. You're just hired help, Zach continued, slowly backpedaling towards the exit. Go ask your pretty boy Gray. I bet he knows. If she didn't know better, Sage might have thought that the vampire was scared, but learning of his entrepreneurial aspirations, she guessed he just wasn't being paid to divulge the juicy details. What kind of weapon could do that? Sage moved to block the vampire's exit. Zach shrugged as both she and Devon glared at him, waiting for answers. I'm not sure, but if the rumors are true, A.S.S.E.T is overstepping its mandate. Good reason for the plebs to fight back. By turning agents into mindless meat shields? Sage found herself shouting at the memory of her mother as it resurfaced. My mom was in that group that was sent to attack us. I had no part in what happened there. Zach held his hands up in surrender, looking just as frightened as Sage felt. I want that made very clear. Above your pay grade? She threw the words at him, finding strength in her anger. She rose up to her full height and glared at the vampire. Even at her full height, though, she was still a head shorter than Zach, but he cowered all the same at her aggressive stance. I may not be in love with A.S.S.E.T, but I'm not stupid enough to be party to an attack on them either. I did what I came here to do. I delivered you to someone who can help you. Consider it a freebie. I did my good deed, and now I'm done. I think you have more to tell us. Devon moved with impossible speed, as if blinking in and out of form, appearing at the doorway, completely blocking Zach's retreat. If what you say is true, and A.S.S.E.T has a destructive weapon, wouldn't it be prudent for you to make sure that you're seen as being on their side? You might as well let him go. Sage had nothing more to say to the sleazy vampire. Informants are only interested in how much profit they can make by playing sides. I bet he doesn't even have information to sell. Devon stepped aside, but made sure that Zach heard his final words. There's always a reckoning. Remember that. Zach scooted through the door without another word. Surprised you let him go, Sage laughed, as she watched the vampire disappear into the night. Run, you bastard. He'll be back. Spineless as that one is, he knows how to ally himself with the winning side before the axe falls. Devon turned to face Sage. Exhaustion hung like heavy luggage under his eyes. He heaved a sigh and joined her, taking a seat on the bench along the wall. If what he said is true, I'm not sure which side is which. Truth time. What exactly is your role in all of this? Combat readiness trainer. After all that, he dared to give her such a vague answer. Okay then, I'll be on my way. Where are you going to go, Sage? He asked. I don't know, somewhere where people are honest and tell me what the hell is going on. A.S.S.E.T is not an evil agency. It is, however, a large organization, and because of that, sometimes it is subject to the whims of higher echelons of power. Is that what you wanted to hear? Better than what I have been hearing. She hadn't meant to sound so mean, but frustrated as she was, her ability to sugarcoat had all but vanished. I read that book you gave me. My people, she shrugged as she said the word, were created to solve problems. You read mythology. The problem with that is, it can't be proven. It's a story. Although a good one that probably gave you all kinds of warm and fuzzies about being a Terra. He nudged her with his elbow. Sage appreciated the gesture. He was at least trying to be on the level with her. Brutal honesty was his motto, and she'd take that. So I shouldn't be proud of what my people have done? No, that's not what I'm saying. Don't take everything as gospel truth. No one, not a single creature walking the earth is good or evil because what race they are. People choose to do good or evil. Devon stressed that point. Even the Terras. As many times as she had heard that phrase, it might as well be on a t-shirt. So what if people inside A.S.S.E.T are doing evil? She asked. That is what has me worried. To his credit, Devon had not bothered to downplay what he thought. If that's true, then we could be on the brink of another magical war. You read the history? Mythology, she corrected. Both have nuggets of truth. Magic has the potential to destroy more than just lives. War could tear apart the very fabric of our society. Best we figure out what's going on, and until then, maybe you shouldn't go back to A.S.S.E.T. Her jaw dropped. She expected him to toe the company line and drag her kicking and screaming back to the barracks. I'm not saying that it's safe for you out here, and I can't guarantee your protection. But if your gut told you to walk away, you better listen. Your gut is a much better voice of reason than you think. They killed my mom. Sage shed a tear. That's why I left. Was she... He didn't need to finish that sentence. Sage nodded and wiped away the tear before he could get out the final word. Makes sense now. Wounds are fresh. It's hard enough having an awakening at your age, but to see the reason why is more than anyone should have to bear. Devon pulled her into a bear hug, and she buried her face into his hard chest. We're going to figure this out, and you'll see. Your people do serve a noble purpose, and you should be proud of what you are. Now I want you to go home, get some sleep, and the moment I find out anything, I will let you know. And what do I do in the meantime? She asked. Keep reading. Learn everything you can. Who knows? Maybe there's something in those books about a weapon to destroy magic. Isn't that what we were created to be? You're magic neutral, Devon said reverently. What Zach described is annihilation. All right, so that was chapter 20. I love that chapter. There's so many nuggets in there, so many good things to pick up on. And if you're paying close attention, there is a lot of clues as to what is going on and what's going to happen next. So I'm wondering if Joe is out there watching today, because I know Joe has a theory. And I want to know if Joe thinks that his theory has changed at this point, or if he's still firm on what he assumed. Let's see who's in the chat today. Hey, Rebecca, how's it going? Did you guys enjoy today? Oh, I'd have to look at it on the big screen and see how that goes. Huh. I'm going to have to try that. I'll replay the videos on the big screen and see if that makes a difference. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Yay. Did you model Zach after Artemis? Nope. Nope. I'm not telling who Zach is modeled after. But there's no burger. I know. God damn it. Sage never gets the food she wants. I think that's a running gag throughout most of this series, including even to book 5, as I'm thinking about it right now. Sage just does not get to eat. Poor thing. Yes, still firm. So Joe still believes that Zach is our villain. What about Gray, though? Is Gray our villain too? Or Devin? Or Ava? We've met, I believe, enough characters at this point for you to start figuring out who the villain is, who's pulling the strings here, who's starting up the problems. But at this point now, you've also read or listened to enough to help figure out what Sage needs to do. So I'm going to ask the question to the audience now. What do you think Sage is going to have to do to get through all this? And will there be this annihilation that Devin speaks of? I sent you a picture of this up on the big screen. I'll have to check my messages and see it. She went out to get a burger. I know. Sage never gets to eat. That's kind of the running gag throughout all of the books. I know. Well, I know you know, Rebecca. You read the books, so you know exactly where this is going. And you also have read the other books in this series, so you know consequences as they build. That's one of the things I wanted to do with this series, is I wanted it to definitely build upon what's happened before. So while book 1 does satisfy one major plot point, it still filters over into the next and to the next and to the next. So I make sure that they're all linked, and you're going to see the deviousness, if you follow the series, of the villains pulling the strings. And at least I hope it's satisfying to you. It's satisfying to me, and it's one of the reasons book 5 is taking so long, because I really, really have to make sure that I'm upping the ante each time. Every book in a series should always be the next level of doom and gloom and the worst case scenario. And as you get further into a series, it becomes harder to really find that believable and serious, antagonistic force, and to make it flow just as well through, everything that we've learned before. So I'm working on it. Book 5 is coming. But today's chapter was one of my favorites. And I love how Zach uses nerdy catchphrases on Sage. And it's definitely disarming for her, because as you see how she interacts with Matt, they speak nerd. And they talk about Doctor Who, and they talk about Princess Bride, and they talk about playing D&D or D&D-like games. And so that works to disarm Sage, because that's her comfort zone. And he's already picked up on this, and he uses this. But the question is he using it genuinely? Is he just as nerdy as she is, or does he know how to play her? Let's see what we got here. Poor Sage stays hungry. Yep. She's always hungry. She needs to arm, not her head. Am I reading that correctly? She needs to arm herself and gain knowledge. Until pizza. Yes. Pizza is important. She needs to use her arm and not her head. I think she needs to use them both. But we will see what happens. We will see. Any other clues that you've picked up on so far that you think are important as we've read so far? We've, like I said, we've read enough to meet all of the important characters, I think. There are a couple more characters you'll meet, I think, in the next chapter coming up, or the one that follows it. But at this point, you have read the big players. So I think at this point, you can kind of begin to suss out who is the villain, who is a good person, who's playing both sides, and start to narrow down where the villain is. So, and I'll be asking Joe because Joe is dead set. He knows Zach is the villain. So as we keep going, I'm gonna ask every time, has it changed? Do you suspect something different now? We know Gray isn't above hiring magical people to attack Terrence. Yeah. He's well deserving of a good kick in the nuts, I think. Underhanded tactics, especially Rebecca, given his history that you know of. The fact that he does that is really nasty. That little tattoo on her wrist unlocks everything. That little tattoo on her wrist, and for those of you who don't know, I also have the tattoo on my wrist. I got that after writing the book because when I originally wrote the book, this was the symbol that inspired me. And so I don't know if I can give you a better look at it, but that was the symbol that helped inspire the book. And so once I had written all the way through book 4, I wanted to get the tattoo because I felt connected to it. So that is exactly left hand. That is where the tattoo is. It's the direction the tattoo is in. The leaves around the outside. And in the center, there is like the little kind of like seed pod-ish kind of thing going on here. And then the roots that are supposed to dig down into her veins. So that was one of the reasons I got that tattoo, is I really felt connected with this story. And that's exactly how sages would appear. And any of the Terras will have that. So every person who is of that Terra lineage will have that marking. Including how to use magic. Who's going to be using magic? That's because Terras can't use magic. So we'll have to see. All right, but we're at 36 minutes, so we are a little bit longer than normal, and I'm sure you guys want to get to your day, whatever that includes. I will be back next week with another chapter, and until then, make sure you guys take care of yourself this week. Do something to make yourself happy and de-stress, and